What's up, YouTube, and welcome back for another episode of Homebrew Subaru. And this weekend I plan on doing something with the RB engine. I've been trying to go through the harness, and it's proved time consuming, and I've got quite a bit of it figured out for the most part, I believe. A couple other little things happened in the last week, like my buddy across the street, he runs a taxi, and his old car failed. Or the transmission or the hybrid system failed in the old car, so we went and bought another car, and then he asked me to move the meter and the radio and everything over from one car to another, so I spent my time doing that and didn't have as much time to work on the engine as I thought I would. But I have made some progress. So for the most part, I've got what I need to figure out in the harness. I've got it figured out. Pretty much all the grounds seem to go straight up to the block and attach to the block in a couple places. There is a couple little ground circuits coming out on this harness, which I've indicated some of them. Some of them go to the connectors, but for the most part, I know this black and red needs to be put to battery power, and here it is down here. The same with this white and purple. Which would come up to the ignition coil relay, and I guess this is just the ECCS relay to power up the computer, and these are those Nissan style relays, so these would actually be in the fuse box, and the relays would attach directly down into these. And I went out to the gold car expecting them to be there, and of course someone's yanked out all the relays out of that car, so even though it had these connectors in the car and the relays would have been in it, they're long gone. So to prevent that from happening, or even having a relay go bad, I'm just going to wire in my own 5-pin relays. One for the ignition coils and one for the computer. So I've got that part of it figured out. At least I should be able to get the computer powered up. Out of all this stuff, I mean, a lot of them just has to be wait till it's merged into the car, but there's connections for the diagnostic port to hook up a scan tool. It would be OBD1, of course, and there's a neutral switch. I'm not sure where that's going to, but here's the output for the fuel pump relay, but we're not going to use that quite yet. And then coming down to this harness, of course I've already mentioned these need power, these bigger ones. This one also needs battery power, and for some reason the tack signal comes out here, I'm not sure why. The power steering switch, so the harness must have at least looped around the front of the back of the car, because the other connections here are for the mass airflow sensor and the O2 sensor, so that stuff does come out here. It won't be really needed to run it, but it's there, and I've kind of figured it out. So for the most part, I've got what I needed figured out. Now at this end, this lower harness, these were quite easy to figure out, but so this main lead is the charging lead coming from the alternator. That's a main lead ground going to the alternator case. This is obviously our main power to the starter, and that's the starter signal. So if I get something rigged up on there to give it power and then just hold that, it should actually crank the starter. And then we've got the oil pressure switch, but I think I'm going to take the oil pressure switch out and actually wind in my manual gauge, so if the engine does actually start and run, I'll be able to see what the oil pressure is. And then just for right now, I've got the high flow fuel pump with the sock on the end, and the return line just zip tied there, so I can pour some fuel into the bucket, maybe put a wet towel over top because I might have some sparking going on over here, but just run those over to the battery and I should be able to control the fuel pump. So coming to the top of the engine, I've got this port plugged off, I've got the brake booster line plugged off. I don't have a mass airflow sensor yet, but I did order a mass airflow sensor, so it is coming. And I don't know if the connector will work off of either one of the 240s outside if it'll actually plug into the mass airflow sensor, so I might have to figure out something with that. But I kind of hoping that the engine will crank over and fire up without the mass airflow sensor, at least kind of stumble to life or at least run for a little bit. It's kind of hard to say. Some cars won't even start without the mass airflow sensor. So, but since I have a dugout, I might as well show you. But this is like the test pipe that I pretty much bought for getting this into the car. This pipe is for an SR20, and the idea is that it will bolt on somewhere there so that I can actually extend it from the rest of the car. I have the rest of the SR exhaust to go on, but up in the front you can see the that flange doesn't line up. It is the proper size flange, so if I just get this one stud to go on, of course this step's in the way over here, but you can see it's proper, so I'll have to cut that flange off and reset it on there so that it's the proper direction, and then hopefully get a good angle going so I can meet up with the rest of the exhaust. But I've got a feeling that's going to have to be done in the car. I don't want to be doing it and trying to make guesswork of which way it's supposed to point. So, but yeah, I think it's going to work in there great. It's a nice 3-inch stainless piece. So I actually don't have a lot of time to spend on this today, but I will try to wire in the relays and make a bunch of battery connections and hopefully at least get the thing to crank. Got to put some oil in it just in case it does fire up, and then, you know, if I've got enough time, I'll try and get it to run by the end of the video. But if not, I'll definitely get something together and post it for Thursday. Okay, so from what I can tell, the time is definitely near. I've got both of these relays kind of just butt connected in there. There's the ECCS relay and the ignition coil relay. The starter input signal, so when it cranks it tells the computer that it is cranking. So I've kind of got that hooked up to the starter, the solenoid lead for the starter. I've got a battery in place, charged up. I've run both of the powers that the 3 of them down here that I needed over to the battery, the fuel pump to the battery, the ground for the fuel pump's right here. I have tested it, but I have not run any fuel through the system yet. I've got the fuel pump sitting here. This old shirt is very wet, not dripping wet, but enough that the fumes should stay in there. This is a little bit dangerous when you have open fuel in a bucket, so I have like, I don't know, maybe a half gallon or just over a half gallon of fuel in that bucket, and if you leave it open, the fumes will just collect in here, and if I spark this, there's a good chance of ignition. Lots of fuel stations have, you know, caught fire that way. So I've worked around fuel a lot. I know the dangers of fuel, and I don't even have a fire extinguisher in here, but I know I shouldn't have a problem as long as I keep that covered. And then once I'm done using it, put it right back in the jerry can and close it up. You don't want fumes ventilating, because that's what catches fire. So the fuel's all hooked up. The battery's all hooked up. Basically the only thing I need to hook up is our main power for the starter. And then once I give ground to the block, I'm expecting the ECU to actually turn on. But I really don't know what's going to happen here, and I've never run a fuel injection block on the ground before, but I know it's at least going to crank, and then if it doesn't start, I can at least through the week I can check for ignition and check for fuel injector pulse and that kind of thing to see why it might not be starting. But I think we're pretty much there, so I'm just going to get a couple quick finish preparations, and then I think I'm going to crank it. Okay, I can hear the relay switch on. So I'm just going to go for a crank first, and hopefully something happens. Keep your fingers crossed. I'm not going to give it any fuel yet. Well, it cranked pretty good. I think I can hear compression. Let's give it some fuel. Well, getting that far, I mean, I would have liked to have it started up, but kind of expected it that it might not. So I just went ahead and checked my powers and grounds going to the ECU. It seems to be powered up. But I mean, there's quite a few other checks to make before I can determine what might be going on, why it might not be starting. And I just don't think I have the time to start diagnosing it today. But I've got it to the point that at least I can crank it over and attempt to start it. And I mean, it's even possibly not having a mass airflow sensor could be causing that issue. So I think it's best if I come back to it. So yeah, like I said, I think it's just better I come back to it. I kind of rushed into this a little bit. I didn't spend a lot of time through the week going through the harness and determining all the circuits, even though I'm pretty sure I have like everything there. There is like one or two black wires that I'm kind of wondering if they're grounds or not. I haven't been able to trace them anywhere. So I mean, anything like that could be the issue. Not having a mass airflow sensor could be an issue. But I'll pop the ignition cover over, and I'll get it to the next point for the next video. I can at least check for spark, check for fuel injector noid light, and just try and start to determine if I'm kind of prepared to start or if there's something else going on. Because just to run this engine in open loop shouldn't take actually very much to get it to fire up. It sounded like it had good compression and it was cranking over really well, had good battery power. Come back to it and hopefully get another video up for Thursday. So besides not getting the RB to start up, I just want to remind everyone that there is a giveaway. I have a small 1080p action cam that I'm giving away, and all you've got to do is write down in the comments. You can do it in this video, you can do it in the last video, is "Yo Homebrew, that's something I'd like to win." And as long as I see that in the comments, I'll enter you into the draw. If you're kind of wondering about the cam and what it comes with, just go look at the past video and you'll get an idea of what I'm giving away. And actually the participation in this one is a lot better than the last giveaway that I did. There's 16 entrants so far, and you've only got one last week to enter into the draw. So make sure to check back on Thursday. I'm going to spend some more time on this. I'll show you some of the diagnostic that I go through to try and figure out why it might not be starting up. And if it doesn't start up, you're probably going to see me doing a lot of this. And but hopefully I figure it out and I can get it to light up outside the car, because if I can, it'll be that much easier to get it to run when it's inside the car. Other than that, if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button for me. Leave your questions and comments further down below, and I'll see you in the next one.